Education is not the filling of a pail, but the lighting of a fire. According to the early 20th century Irish blues singer, Blind Willie Yeats. A pail is another word for bucket, as in Jack, also the name of Yeats's less famous painter brother, and Jill, no relation, went up the hill to fetch a pail of water. Has any of you who've ever lit a fire, well, no, it's not easy, even with the right tricks and tools. Matches are good, so too firelighters. So too an eye for the driest of kindling and for the little bits of last night's burnt wood in the ashes that might most easily take flame. As an undergraduate in a draughty house in the northernmost coast of County Antrim in Northern Ireland, one of my friends taught me how to hold a broadsheet of newspaper over the mouth of the fireplace so as to funnel more oxygen towards the afflatus. I can still see the orange flames beginning to flicker and rise behind the smudged print of what was already old news. In a time before Fox News, Ezra Pound, former assistant to Blind Willie B, and the man most often credited with shoving him closer to the flames of modernism, once described poetry as news that stays news. And so it goes with all writing that continues to delight. So today, 6 of our soon-to-be graduates and their news. As teachers and advisors, now is the moment when we begin to see a little more out of the smoke of drafts and rewrites and do-overs and double do-overs, if we've succeeded in helping these writers become better at the art of fire lighting and fire keeping. Can they scrunch the paper up and set it in the right spot under the twigs? Can they strike a match without burning their bangs or getting a nose full of sulphur? Can they work the bellows? Can they, as they say in the northernmost coast of County Antrim, keep her lit? More importantly, will the fires we've tried to help them kindle and sustain them after they leave here? Will they be tenders of the flame? Tenders of the tinder, if you will, the tinder we have tendered to them. Because what we hope we'll witness today, Harlia, Bree, Angela, Brianna, Connor, and May, is not so much an end as a beginning, as you step out into the world and set that world on fire. In preparing to do so, we hope you'll remember to burn down the house metaphorically rather than literally. We ask you to keep your matches away from children, and that you don't smoke at the edge of the forest, especially in late August, in a time of drought. Most of all, though, today, we plush up our poodle perms with some highly flammable hairspray and hold our cigarette lighters aloft as you share with us your torch songs, your power ballads. As the great Blind Willie B sang in his chart-topping hit from 1916, we urge you to burn, baby, burn. Actually, no, that was the Tramps from their 1976 hit, Disco Inferno. But anyway. Our readers will read in alphabetical order by last name, and they'll introduce each other. The first reader will be Arlia. Please give her a big welcome.
Wow, this is really different. Okay. So my thesis is about a girl who's in college, and she has an assignment to do. And this assignment entails her going back and investigating a criminal case in her hometown, but there's more to it than she realizes when she begins. And it's called Retelling Natalia. When she reached the church, Ellen stopped as soon as she realized she had no idea what she was doing. What if there were only 2 people in the church, Harbinger and the kid he was tutoring? She felt sick just thinking about it. And what if she caught him in the middle of something she wished she had never seen? Who the hell would leave him alone with a kid after what he did to his niece? She remembered that part of the case wasn't actually made public. Was that Mrs. Bernard's fault? Was she responsible for the safety of these kids? Was Ellen also sworn to secrecy by virtue of speaking about the case with Mrs. Bernard, the journalist? Did a journalist have a duty to report on something if it hurt all of the parties involved? Had other kids been subjected to torture, like Kate? The little church's doors opened to a small entryway, where pamphlets were scattered on a fold-up table, and a corkboard advertised local happenings, like yard sales and barn dances. Through a door straight ahead of Ellen, the main service room stood in its tiny glory, with enough room to fit maybe 100 people. To the right of the entryway, there was a door to the bathrooms and a connecting community room, where the tutoring sessions would be held. Ellen pushed through the door on the right and walked straight down the hallway toward the bathrooms. The community room sat on the right just before the bathrooms, and she could hear more than 2 voices coming from it, which was a good thing. Ellen poked her head in the doorway and saw around 15 elementary school children and 5 or 6 adults. And there were 3 men. She couldn't exactly remember what Harbinger looked like, but as soon as she saw one man with weird-looking skin sitting down with 3 young girls at a table, she knew who she was looking at. Keeping his image clean, thought Ellen. Clever. Ellen had seen Harbinger before, but now she felt like she was seeing him in a new light. No matter how often you saw him, the skin on his face looked like it was either heavily made up or entirely foreign to his body. The unfortunate thing about Silver Falls' location was that getting a good doctor meant traveling, and Ellen figured that the money from his civil suit hadn't come through yet when he had the procedure done. It was too light to have originally been on his face. There were also slight red patches in unnatural places on his face and neck. Her own skin started to crawl. The graft must have covered 90% of his face. She could only imagine the pain he had to endure while his face was mutilated, the fire eating at him. She chided herself for her empathy. She was feeling something for someone who she should be suspicious of, according to Mrs. Bernard. She went to the bathroom to think. It was almost 9 o'clock. If she was lucky, the tutoring session would end on the hour, and she could get to see him in other contexts. She sat on the toilet lid until 8:58, and then casually walked out into the entryway, joining the mothers and fathers who were waiting to pick their children up. She buried her face in her jacket just in case anyone would recognize her. Silver Falls was too small for Ellen to get comfortable. A few minutes after 9, the kids came scampering out to their parents. One showed his mother a paper on which he had practiced subtraction. Another asked to see her mother's phone so she could play a game. The tutors followed closely behind, carrying their teaching materials. Harbinger came out last, leaning on a cane with every step of his left foot. Ellen walked outside with the crowd and pulled out her phone, pretending to be consumed with something like any other teenager in the world. Harbinger hobbled into his car and drove up the hill. Apparently, he wasn't moving too easily these days. As soon as she saw his car disappear up the hill, Ellen headed for Lover's Lane. The biggest house on Lover's Lane, Harbinger's house, was a smooth beige color with a stark red door. It must have been recently repainted, Ellen guessed, because the colors were different from what she remembered. The brassy doorknob was still the same, though, as was the mailbox. Painted in scripted letters was Mr. Clinton Harbinger, 52 Lover's Lane. His yard was very well kept for someone who couldn't move very well. Maybe he paid someone to take care of it. Sometimes the neighborhood boys posted on the church community board that they were available for hire in landscaping, which really meant push mowing the grass. So much about Silver Falls was about appearances ever since the fire. She ducked behind a pale yellow house 2 lots away from Harbinger's. Walking through the overgrown wooded area between the houses, her boots crunched on the snow and prickly thorns from last season grabbed at her pants. She was certain people were watching her, wondering with their eyes why Ellen Martyr was back in Silver Falls and why she would be sneaking through other people's brush. When she reached number 52, she no longer heard the leaves or felt the thorns. Her breath grew shallow and the atmosphere grew still. Ellen slowly walked up to a window on the first floor of the house and looked in to see what must have been the kitchen. It was one of the cleanest kitchens she had ever seen, but maybe that was because Ellen's parents were comfortable with their kitchen looking like children used it. To the right of the window sat an empty, silvery sink that casted light over the rest of the kitchen. Black granite countertops and a cobbled black backsplash decorated the room. It gave off a pleasant and tasteful vibe, and something about that made Ellen's stomach turn. She walked around to the back of his house, making sure to stay close to the siding and make as little noise as possible. Luckily, his lawn had very little snow, and she was careful not to leave any footprints. Another ground floor window looked in on a dining room. In the middle sat a beautiful wooden table, with small ornamentations carved into the legs and the edges. 2 candles stood tall and thin in the middle of the table, on top of a dark purple table runner. The walls were painted a Navajo red. Again, this room was so clean it looked like it was barely used. She crept around to the left side of the house, where she encountered another ground floor window. She peered in and reasoned she must have been looking into the sitting room. There were 2 leather chairs, a table, and a wall made of bookshelves, and a piano. There was an oriental rug in the middle of the room that sat atop a dark hardwood floor. Opposite her was a TV that showed a local news channel. Straining her neck, Ellen was able to change her angle to see a couch to the right of the window. At last, she saw him dig his cane into the hardwood floor and push himself up. In the winter light, his skin looked papery, like someone had crumpled it up and he had tried to smooth it back out before reapplying it to his face. Ellen watched him slowly make his way out of the room and slump down against the side of his house. Legs up against her chest, she felt like she had failed. She saw absolutely nothing incriminating. Not that she really wanted to, but she also secretly hoped she would just be able to decide how she felt about him. She was literally sitting on this guy's lawn because she had only heard and not confirmed that he was a rapist. Ellen only wanted his internal criminal nature to suddenly appear in all its grotesque nature. She wanted it to be plain as day. The sound of a side door opening interrupted her self-pity. A squeaking sound followed, as if something was struggling to hold a weight placed on top of it. Moving with incredible self-awareness, Ellen scooted towards the edge of the house. Peering around the corner, she saw Harbinger sitting on a deck chair without a jacket on, perfectly at ease in the cold winter air. In his hands was a pair of binoculars, which he slowly held up to his eyes. They did not seem to be anything in particular he was looking at, as the woods were still with the exception of a cold breeze that occasionally blew through the tops of the trees. He must not have been able to feel the cold. If he was not able to physically feel temperature, were there other things he couldn't feel? Ellen thought it would only make sense if the skin was entirely destroyed in the fire that Harbinger couldn't feel much of anything, because the sensory mechanism would have also been destroyed. Did the deficit he experienced in the physical feeling somehow mean a psychological disconnection as well? She almost felt bad. Any person in skin like that must have felt such a disconnection from everyone else. At this point, did he even remember what it was like to feel anything? When he picked up a kiwi, did he feel the rough fuzz with his pudgy fingers? Or when he put clothes on that were just out of the dryer, did he feel their warmth? Could he feel the coolness of bed sheets when he tucked himself in at night? She could not imagine perceiving a world in which she literally lost touch with mundane objects, especially when she experienced the world as someone who had been traumatized herself. Her whole grounding process was only possible with the softness of flannel sheets or the Christmas pine candle she kept in her room. Only one person would know more about this than Harbinger would. Certainly his niece would have heard something about the effect of the fire in court. Ellen slowly moved back toward the front of the house, and then ran directly into the road, reached the sidewalk on the other side, and walked down Lover's Lane towards home, already thinking about what she would say to Kate. Thank you. Next, we have Brie McBride.
Hey guys. Okay. So my name's Brie, and for my senior thesis, I wrote a feature-length screenplay titled Anti-Prom, which is a story about a girl named Pilar and her 2 friends as they plan an anti-prom because Pilar gets banned from the actual prom because she gave a boy a concussion by accident. And so the internal conflict that Pilar is kind of struggling with throughout the entire screenplay is the relationship she has with her stepfather, which also happens to be the principal. So she's basically going behind his back. And the scene I want to read for you today takes place near the end where Pilar has a turning point and she decides, like, maybe I shouldn't do the anti-prom, maybe I don't want to go against my father's back. So this scene takes place at Chuck E. Cheese when they have their first father-daughter date. Pilar and Paul play Dance Dance Revolution until Paul pulls his back out. Pilar helps him off the ground and both immediately go sit down in a booth. Paul and Pilar are both panting. Paul, I am so sorry. It's fine, Pilar, it's fine. I haven't worked out in a while. Yeah, Dance Dance Revolution can get really intense. Do you and your friends do this every weekend? No, but me and Mom used to do it a lot when I was younger. You should take it here sometime. Only if you come, you're a Chuck E. Cheese encyclopedia. You know everything about this place. That would be nice, but please don't invite Dylan. Oh, I know, that boy is too competitive for his own good. They both genuinely laugh. Momentarily, an overexcited waitress with uncontrollable blonde hair comes up to their table. What would you two like today? I would like a toddler-sized pizza, and please, please, please make it extra greasy. And for you, sir, I would like an extra-large pizza, and make it only medium greasy. The waitress walks away with a skip in her step. Pilar's mouth is wide open. What is it? You actually ordered a pizza? I just wanted to change things up a bit. Pilar looks pleased and sits up straighter in the booth. So, how are your friends? They are fine. Dylan is probably my number 3 friend right now. So you guys are pretty close? Yeah, ever since our McDonald's brother-sister date. That's nice. So have you thought about the future at all? Like summer vacation? I kind of want to go to snowboarding camp in Colorado. I could even be the next Shaun White without the red hair. Not this summer, college-wise. Well, I'm a junior, so I figure I have some time. Yes, but it's important to plan ahead so you're not having a stressful senior year. Dylan is a senior, and he's going to be fine. We basically have the same work ethic. Yes, but Paul fidgets in his chair and adjusts the collar on his shirt. But what? Nothing. It's nothing. No, tell me, Paul. I can take it. Dylan has always had a kind of direction and a momentum. I'm not too worried about him. Paul continues to mess with his shirt. Pilar's fists clench underneath the table. You've known me for a year. How do you know I don't have direction? Sure, I'm a total goof, but I do take AP courses. Sure, they aren't in math or science, but history and English count too. I'm also a one-sport athlete. Did you forget I do curling in the winter? And on top of all of that, I'm in the Glee Club. You aren't in the Glee Club. Our school doesn't even have a Glee Club. Regardless, I do a lot of things that you don't see. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. You're right. I do see all those things. I just had trouble seeing at first how all of your accomplishments added up. I do trust that you will get the job done. You're a very determined young lady. The pizzas are delivered. Both Paul and Pilar make no moves to dig into their meals. You actually trust me? Yes, I do. Paul eventually dives into his pizza, almost devouring half of it in one bite. Whoa, this is amazing. We should have had this at the wedding. Yeah, we should have. Pilar looks down at her pizza, not making any moves. Everything okay? Pilar shakes herself off. No, everything is fine. I'm just nervous about the party tonight. Oh yes, Harry is a handsome fellow. If I was in your position, I'd be absolutely restless. Pilar gives a brittle laugh. Pilar gives a brittle laugh, takes a bite of her pizza, and closes her eyes. So that's one scene I wanted to share. And the next scene is one of my favorite scenes to write. It's kind of like a love banter with Pilar's love interest named Harry. Yeah, so. All right. So, this is Harry and Pilar. I'll start with Harry. We both kissed each other. You think we have chemistry? Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to deny that. What about our long night conversations? Oh, that was an exaggeration. But just stop making us seem like a couple. Okay, I'm sorry I did that. When I really like someone, I exaggerate. You like me? Yeah, well, do you? I don't know. I think you do, but you're afraid. Don't tell me how I feel. Sometimes good friends are able to read your emotions. We aren't good friends. Well, I want you to be, probably even more now at this point. Ever wonder why I always randomly call? Why I randomly come to your house? Why I randomly walk up to you in the hallway and start speaking straight bullshit? Also, if you didn't feel the same way, why did you kiss me back at the party? And why did you force Dylan to drive you all the way to my house to talk to me? You could have texted or called or waited by my locker. Pilar just stares at him. So, are you going to say anything? Yeah. Well, what do you want me to say? Maybe something along the lines of, I like you back. You don't like me, you like the idea of me. That's not true. You only like me because I created the anti-prom and that I'm semi-popular, and you wouldn't even look at me twice as this never happened. It's true, the anti-prom put you on my radar. But if plans fell through and no one came, I would still like you. Listen, you don't have to say anything now. Just tell me how you feel when you're ready. Okay. Okay. So the next student coming up here is one of my best friends, Angela Kitsoulakis.
So I wrote a collection of poems titled Deconstructing a Face, and I'd like to start by reading my dedication. This collection of poems is dedicated to my middle school English teacher, Miss Kathy Koenig, who introduced me to poetry, Professor Kieran Berry for shaping me into the poet I am today, and my parents, my sister, and my grandparents for giving me a life to be inspired by. So my first poem is titled Making Pilaffi. If you're Greek, or I think there might be like other cultural versions of this, but you cook a chicken, you use the broth, and you boil the rice, and you serve them together. So this poem was written after I had spent some time with my grandmother filming her for 3 hours while she made this dish. It's called Making Pilaffi. Tomato skin sheds in the shape of your breath when you sigh, peeling the membrane from its body. Your hand flutters as you replay your yesterday, and the yesterday 40 years prior, and the Monday a week from tomorrow. Lowering the ladle to fish out the foam and froth that rises as our dinner boils, you fill the space with monosyllabic sounds, the ehs and ahs that reverberate inside the straw body of the airplane I rode into your arms 4 months after my birth. On a crag of land surrounded by water, as blue as a painting, or perhaps as dirty as the turpentine and linseed oil used to strip the brush. My mother surrenders me to your hands. Your wrinkles darken with my weight, and my ears pop for the first time. Your callous thumb, gnawed by the relentless mistakes and clawed by each slip of the knife when you first peeled tomatoes, glides against my fresh forehead. Using your 8th grade words and your 70-year-old voice, you describe me to everyone in your Rolodex. 10 years later, in your kitchen, I want to know why the tomatoes need to be stripped of their skin. Why do we need to see their beady flesh in the pits between our fingers as we drop them in? Each step is arduous, and I'm longing for speed or a shortcut, but you only tell me the rice is ready when it's red. So the next poem is about the horror that is middle school, and it's called 6th Grade Dance. Nail polish should come off like sheets, but instead it chips into small countries with borders like teeth, craggy from sparring in a parking garage. The skinny guys hold out the longest, taking knuckle scrapes to the jaw until they're knocked out. Their smudged blood stains the cement bed of my nails as I disassemble my makeshift map. The pieces drift down onto the tan Cadillac carpet. I press the pad of a sweaty finger onto a chill window to watch a white halo form, then disappear without my touch. I let the wordless music pump my chest like an AED as I allow myself to be taken from the capsule of the car into memorized imaginings of the glares and glances, ideas that people care about the shine on my shoes or how wide I smile. Fabricated hand brushes and shoulder smudges make me gasp as the others hum in the car without me. I'll chip every freckle off my middle finger and save the pieces to put back together later when I'm alone in a gray bathroom stall waiting for the dance to end. So in this collection I played a lot with fears, and I ended up writing a poem about my biggest fear, which is getting my blood drawn. It's called My First Blood Draw. The car ride is a slide projector photo album. Blinks are the black spaces between banal stills. Anxiety feels like two bodiless arms, outstretched, trying to catch every raindrop in the storm. But the drops are Fabergé dragon eggs, glowing red with chicken yolks inside. I can't hold anything, and no one's hand is tight enough. In the doctor's office, I'm inside the fluorescent light. Finger chains cuff down my wrists. My ankles are as narrow as the letter L written in pencil, and my mother watches. I am only 6, and nothing is possible. My vocal folds were a bee's wings underneath bleak skin. The needle burst through me like a fat man jumping out of a paper cake. My eyes zip shut. It's still happening. The needle plunges my blood from my vein into a freakish chamber. She tells me to open my eyes and watch it bubble out of me into vials, her black-rimmed bandit glasses stealing my blood to spill on the sidewalk. So if you ever listened to or read any of my poems, you know I write a lot about my pets. So I wrote about my pet rabbit named Ginger. The poem is called Ginger. I pet my rabbit with the padded knuckles of my gardening glove. She remembers when I caged her on my balcony and chased her with a broom. We race one another, and it's cute when she pants, her chest hot and drumming like a sneaker in the dryer. When she thumps, I laugh and knock on the glass of the sliding door. It's okay. I'm the treble and she is the bass. Now she bites, so I grip the back of her neck while watching water droplets race across the tinted window, furrowing my soft brows to study their finesse as they drain downwards towards the door. Her head bows beneath my plastic thumb. 15 minutes up the mountain, Dad unclasps the car door to let us out. Sandpaper hills spread beneath us like a diorama. We are the wax figurines next to a black varnish road. I put Ginger down, and she sits on her white tail fluff beneath bare trees pressed to the sky, my exposed arteries spreading across the membrane of my lungs. When I breathe in, their elastic walls spread out. Starfish return to the sea, and I don't care to know what happens when I stop breathing. Using broken twigs, I build her a circle, a half-hearted nest next to her rock, a shell of a shelter. She won't survive, but I don't know that yet. And my last poem is the title of the entire collection. It's called Deconstructing a Face. Scratch at your jawline, the seam where face turns into body. Lazily rake your cheeks and allow the oil to mix with dead cells to make a dough under your fingernails. Don't hesitate, keep scraping until the skin is sanguine and all your foundation is gone. Twist your eyelashes with your fingers, let them curl around each other, acquainted arms on the dance floor of a Russian ballroom. Let the mascara flake off like a woman's gloves after the fin of an antique film. Lids foiled beneath copper powder pasted with sweat. Pull the corners to make eyelids into arrows to clawed cheeks. Place your face under the faucet, drown under the water, white when running, clear when still. Try to make out the slope of your nose and the color of your eyes in the reflection of water cupped in cracked hands. Thank you. Next is Brianna Scalisi.
Is this okay? Yeah. Hi, I'm Brianna, and I wrote a nonfiction collection of essays titled The Road to Forza. I'm going to read my little foreword, and then the essay that I'm choosing to read is called The Patient's Body. I've heard people say that you cannot write someone else's story until you write your own. I think it's true. Every time I've tried to write a piece of fiction, it is messily infused with parts of myself and the people around me. My poetry is worse, cryptic and terrified to tell the truth. Henceforth, I'll be telling pieces of my story with my own name attached, detailing the most poignant moments of my life. Only pieces, because I have not only built walls, but I have built skyscrapers, pyramids, and chain link fences to protect the deeply personal parts of myself. I guess I just want people to stop asking me, in elevators, and taxi cabs, and Bath and Body Works, and bars, what happened to you? I've become an expert on how to best summarize and detragify my story, on how to desensitize myself in a 30-second explanation. I don't want to do that anymore. Perhaps this will help. A few sketches of the muddled, beautiful, heartbreaking, silly fragments of my life. The patient's body. Experience does not mean anything until you understand it. Until I came to terms with the hospital as my truest and cruelest home, one that wholly shaped who I am, I didn't know who I was. I think the reason that I am not deeply attached to the first boy who ever touched me is because by the time I was 15, I had already been touched by a lot of people. That's what it's like growing up in a hospital and as a child with a disability. People are always probing you, touching you, poking you with foreign objects. It creates a very strange paradox about how you feel about your body. Not that I'm not a sexual person. I understand and experience sex as an incredibly important part of human connection. But my body has not been, since I was 6 years old, my own. The Children's Hospital is a paradox. I believe that children are the world's fiercest, most fearless fighters. Children are not like adults who can escape into the world of drugs and alcohol or threaten to commit suicide because their lives are just too fucking hard. I did not even think of taking my own life as an option. I was fighting to keep it. However, childhood is supposed to be, as Edna St. Vincent Millay so comfortingly assured in her famous poem, the kingdom where nobody dies. So then what is the childhood of a child who spends years in a hospital? Hospitals are where we all go to be healed or to die. Hospitals are the physical embodiments of Darwinism, where the strong survive and the weak wither away in the night. If children are supposed to be cloaked by innocence and filled with light, how does a child surrounded by illness and death maintain her light? The patient's body is consistently invading during the healing process. Endless streams of medicines, needles, and tubes are intertwined with the body that struggles to distance itself from the soul inside it. I learned that this distance is essential. I used to stare up at the butterflies on the hospital's walls. I wanted to not only escape my pain, but to fly far away. Through flight, I could soar away from the world that was hurting me. Through flight, I could be a child. If I was going to imagine myself as anything else, it would be something that could go high into the sky when the doctor came into the room to remove 50 staples from my back. I focused on the blue butterfly above me. Children are supposed to be protected and unharmed. So then what does it mean to be both a patient and a child? At 6 years old, I was sitting in a hospital trying to figure this all out. My first hospital stay after the car accident was 74 days long and was undoubtedly one of the most crucial times in my life. I was not expected to survive the first night. The doctors told my family to plan for the worst. I do not know what injury they addressed first. I had suffered a spinal cord injury, a concussion, a tear in my heart, and major stomach and intestinal trauma. I think it was my stomach that needed the most attention because within those first 24 hours, I had 3 feet of my intestines removed. Like the flashback of my lifeless mother, I distinctly remember my stomach feeling like it was being ripped from my body. My father and I were rushed by the airborne version of an ambulance known as Lifestar to the hospital due to our traumatic injuries and the dire need to save my life. My father yelled over the noise of the helicopter, "Are you okay, honey?" "I'm okay, Daddy, but my tummy hurts," I said softly through clenched teeth. I was, of course, downplaying the most excruciating pain I'd ever experienced. I did not want to worry him, a fatal flaw that will follow me with men in regards to downplaying my own pain for the rest of my life, or at least it hasn't disappeared yet. The name Lifestar is quite beautiful. I like the idea that there's a star in the sky that's looking out for us all, like God, but simpler. I like the fact that my own life was saved by something modeled after the brightest components of our galaxy. Maybe it's the reason I never fell into the hospital's darkness. That is the last concrete memory I have during the first week following the accident. The surgeries that I survived left me in a constant loop of pain and pressing a button for more morphine. But I have heard other people's stories. My grandmother is a woman who could once lift a 100-pound bag of flour over her shoulder and painted her own 3-story house. Even as the most unemotional woman I know, she still has tears in her eyes when she talks about the pain she watched me endure. She said one of the worst moments of her life was when they told her I was never going to walk again. They sat her down because for some reason everyone thinks sitting down will make bad news easier to bear. I've been sitting down for 15 years. It doesn't make anything easier, trust me. And they looked into her aged eyes, manic with the loss of her 35-year-old daughter, and told her that her 6-year-old granddaughter was never going to walk again. She said it was like being hit with a ton of bricks. She felt an instant loss of any earthly power. There was nothing she could do. I have a difficult time feeling sorry for myself or understanding why other people pity me. Why strangers come up to tell me that they will pray for me. Why everyone goes out of their way to tell me I'm strong. When I heard my grandmother describe the moment that she realized my life was forever changed, I felt something. I felt that maybe what happened to me was a big deal, that my story is important. I asked her to talk about these first few weeks in the hospital sometimes still because they're a chunk of my life that I cannot remember. Not because we all forget the small details of our childhood, but because I was heavily drugged to stop my 36-pound body from feeling, which in turn affected not only my physical body, but my emotional mind. When you are in pain in the hospital, you simply lift a finger to have it reduced. In life, there is no magical button, a lesson I had to learn the hard way, and one my father could not come to terms with. I do not even remember my father coming to tell me that my mother was dead. Through the tunnel connecting the adult and children's hospital, he momentarily pulled himself away from his own pain to tell me that the love of our lives was dead. No one else wanted to tell me. No one knew what to say. But I don't remember what he said. I was not coherent enough. I do remember my grandmother sitting at the hospital bedside as she often has with a book in hand. She was reading aloud in her soothing reading voice that has lulled me to sleep and away from physical and mental pain my entire life. Behind her, a balloon floated in the air. My room was covered in cards, flowers, balloons, stuffed animals. Like the hospital's decor, which compiled images of escape, like the butterfly or birds or airplanes, relatives hoped that buying bright, colorful things would make me forget, if only for a second, that I was a child living in a hospital. I stared at the balloon. My grandma looked at me tenderly. "Do you want to send it up in the sky to Mama?" she asked. I couldn't speak because of the breathing tube, but I knew what she meant. In fact, I think I felt it before she said anything to me. I felt the loss of my mother in the air coming through the breathing tube, and I felt it in my being. I am mildly obsessed with the concept of soulmates, that we all have people in the world who are essential to our lives. Kismet. But if a soulmate is a person ideally suited to another, my mother was my soulmate, a soul that was intertwined with mine. She had a life comparable to mine in its hardships. She was a fighter, a soldier, literally, and an incredible person to first be loved by. She was stylish, effortlessly cool, and always smiling. And I lost her. Searching for a man to fill that place seems absurd. I can say this retrospectively now, but in the moment that I heard about my mother's death, I didn't feel anything. I essentially could not. The days in the hospital to follow would be a constant, every second of the day battle for me, for which I had no time to grieve either my mother or the loss of my own abilities. As the hospital is a grand bubble, devoid of society's realities, I wouldn't really know about the grief that would await me in the future. Most prominently 7 years later, when I was an orphaned, anxious, depressed preteen who needed my mother. The need for fulfillment that stemmed from the death of my mother and of my legs later found its outlet in a desire to have many friends, and then boys, and finally sex. The hospital morphed my understanding of my body as mine versus my body as their patient, whom they knew it was best for. After putting my health before my privacy, a choice that was not my own, I was never again afraid to be touched. And because of the consistent 24-hour care that a hospital provides, I needed it. I grew up desperately needing the comfort of other humans. From the time I was 6 years old until I was a preteen, I was never left alone for more than a few minutes, finding solitary escape in my sleep. In the hospital, every hour someone comes in to examine you. At home, my grandmother slept in increments of 2 hours to constantly check on me. Because I've been in the hospital many times for long periods of time, occurrences have inevitably blurred together. I can't remember if it happened when I was 6 or 8 or 12, but during one of my hospital stints, a 5-year-old walked into a baby's room, picked up the baby, dropped the baby, and the baby died. After that, it seemed like every few minutes someone was coming in to stick a thermometer in my ear, sling a blood pressure cuff on my arm, or to shove a catheter up my urethra, or to make sure I was still breathing. Urinary catheterization is the process by which a latex or silicone tube, known as a catheter, is inserted into your urethra to drain your bladder of its fluids. A lot of people experience catheterization: pregnant women, older people, anyone who has a lengthy surgery. However, if you're paralyzed, catheterization is an everyday, every 4 hours a day thing. And now, literally in this moment writing this, I realize that catheterization is what has made me feel that my body is not fully mine. For those who must, self-catheterization begins around 11 years old. But when you're in a hospital, people are constantly touching what most children are made to understand are their private parts. So essentially, my parts lost their privacy after 6 years of existence. It's not that any doctor or nurse ever touched me inappropriately, but it's simply the fact that they were touching me. Therefore, the hospital tainted my understanding of my body in the sense that I've always known and experienced more of my body than most people, and in the sense that my private parts are significantly more than just places of sexual pleasure. Maybe that's why losing my virginity was not this epically monumental moment, or why I'm not like my friends who all felt deeply attached to their firsts. I had to give up my own sense of personal intimacy in order to save and care for my body. You're going to flip this Connor shirt in.
So, like Arlia, I also did fiction, and like Arlia, I'm starting closer to the middle than the beginning. It's not because the beginning of my story is bad, but Professor Ferris is welcome to disagree, because God knows she's read enough times. I just think that this is where the meat of the story really kicks in. Story about two people. Their names are Will and June. They live in a city, and I think that's all you really need to know. Will sort of wished that June had called him out on not taking the pills then, so they could have had this fight weeks ago. Will picked up one of the family photos he kept face down on his nightstand. It was taken at a cousin's wedding a few years ago, back before everything. Back before then, he had worn his shirt sleeves rolled up, and the photographer had snapped the picture right before he'd burst out laughing at a witty quip that Katie had made. His smiles had reached his eyes a few years ago, he noted with a pang. He slowly turned the picture frame back down. He was okay with that usually, but sometimes being reminded hurt more than it should. Will walked back into the living room and refreshed his glass. June was back inside and the window was closed again. "Hey, sorry about that," she said. She stuck her plate in the dishwasher and sat back down. "I wasn't really thinking right." "You don't have to apologize," Will replied. "I was being an ass. I shouldn't have snapped at you." You have a rough enough day as it is, doing what it is you do." Neither of them said anything for a moment. Will rolled his shoulders in a small shrug. But I was serious. You ought to move in with Mike if I'm the only thing holding you back. It's not like we couldn't be friends anymore. I'd still see you around. You could use the car if you needed. I know, but you all alone, I'd manage. Maybe you should find someone. It'd be good for you. Will froze for a second, and he barely stopped his hand from creeping down to the phone in his pocket, to cover it, to hide it. I'm not ready for that right now. Maybe when I start feeling more like myself again. Maybe in a few months. You know, I think it would help you to have someone you can open up to and be honest around, someone other than me. Someone who will get to know you over time, like I did. I'm better off on my own. Take it slow. You don't have to be able to explain everything right away. It's not that simple, June. June put her hands up in a gesture of surrender and backed down. When the silence between them grew too long and uncomfortable, she walked back into the kitchen and began rearranging things in the drawers. After a moment, she put her hand in her pocket. Mike's calling again. I'm going to go take this. Will nodded and watched as she walked into her bedroom. June was never a good liar, and Will wondered why she even bothered to try to hide it anymore. She knew that he knew that Mike wasn't calling. She never left her phone on silent when she was at home. But they both had these little white lies they would tell each other when they needed a few minutes alone and wanted to save face. It just so happened that Will was much better at spinning his than she was. Will tried to respect her space the same way June tried to respect his. It was one of the biggest reasons they had been friends this long. Will pulled on his coat and took what was left of the wine bottle out onto the fire escape. He leaned against the rusty iron railing and tipped the bottle up to his mouth. Will closed his eyes and listened to the sounds of the dark city, the car engines and alley cats and distant police sirens. Someone was shouting somewhere. A throbbing bass beat played in a nearby building. The shrieking wind and cold air tore the breath from his throat and brought color to his cheeks. It was a chaotic mess out here, dirty and noisy, and nothing made sense. And knowing that made Will feel at peace, if only for a little while. He steadied himself against the railing as his head started to spin, the full effects of the alcohol just now getting to him. He put the bottle down by the window and braced himself on the platform, letting the cold sober him up a little. June stepped onto the platform not long after that. You feeling okay? Will nodded. Come on, drink with me. When June took the bottle, Will turned his head over the railing and spat. I don't deserve a friend like you. You put up with all my bullshit. Of course I do. That's what friends are for. Don't be so modest. You're just at a rough point. You did the same thing for me back when we were in college. I guess so, but you were never this bad. Will reached out for the bottle but stopped himself, digging his fingernails into his palm. I'm glad you're still with me. The wind went past, howling through the alley between the buildings. Will looked up at the narrow rectangle of sky above their heads. Remember how we used to stay out all night and watch the sunrise? How long's it been since we last did that? At least a year and a half. June saw Will scratching his wrist again. You shouldn't pick at it, you know, it's a bad habit. Yeah, sorry. He smiled at her. June smiled back and took another drink, hoping the alcohol would warm her up. Will was leaning out over the rail, his eyes closed and his face turned to the sky. The wind caught his coattails and made them flap about his waist. He looked almost like a crow ruffling his feathers, ready to spread his wings, to leap into the air and fly, even if just for a moment. Careful, she said, it's a long way down. Will seemed to consider that for a moment before shrugging and stepping back. He took the wine bottle from her and drank. I read somewhere once, he said slowly, obviously picking his words very carefully, that the people who jump off buildings and bridges and whatnot, the ones they manage to save with the big mattresses and stuff, they almost all regret what they'd done. They wish they hadn't jumped. June recoiled. This was dangerous ground, and Will was obviously not thinking right. She had to be careful what she said next. Couldn't push him too hard or else. Will considered the wine bottle for a moment. But, you know, I think that's a load of bullshit. I think those people just lack resolve. If they'd been serious about it, they would hate the fact that they've been saved. June steadied herself and tried to stop shaking. And you? You had resolve? Will glanced down at the cuffs of his jacket that had ridden up enough to show a collection of mostly parallel vertical scars on his wrists. Yeah, when I woke up in the hospital, I knew what had happened, and I hated you for it. I understood why you did it. I mean, it's your job after all, but still. He sighed and shook his head. I got over it. I'm okay with it now. I know things were bad for you, but really, there had to have been another way. I don't know. Will's voice was different now, more detached, almost rehearsed. I'm not sure there was. I wanted to embrace eternity, to be transcendent. People can't do that, not when they're alive, I mean. I guess I just wanted a straight answer as to whether or not there was a hereafter. You didn't embrace the sublime or any of that crap. All you did was nearly bleed out in our bathtub. Will shrugged. I suppose that's how you'd see it. I thought if I did it my way, you could just run some water, toss in some toilet cleaner, and wash it out afterwards. I didn't want to leave a mess. That wouldn't have been fair to you. You think I'm going to live here after you killed myself? You should say it out loud, June. Will sighed. No, I didn't think you'd stick around, but I didn't want you to have to repaint a room or anything to cover up the blood for a new tenant. I assumed you were just moving with Mike after I was gone. June shook her head. Fuck you. How can you be so calm about this whole thing? If I hadn't gotten home when I did, and if I hadn't been a nurse, I mean, Jesus, Will. I already said I don't regret doing it. A note of anger, or perhaps impatience, had crept into his voice. With Will, it was hard to tell, because one so quickly led to another. I mean, I'm not going to cut up my wrists again, but at the time the decision seemed the right thing to do. He held up a hand. No, I get it. I should have talked to you or somebody or gotten some help. But back then I wasn't exactly being logical, was I? Objectively, I can look back and know my thought process was flawed, but back then I didn't really care. How can you approach this so clinically? It's easier that way. I didn't want to be alive anymore, so I decided not to be. I mean, obviously I fucked it up, so I'll have to try something different. After all this shit and you're talking about doing it again, June snapped. Well, not the same way, no, but I've considered it. Will, you need help. I know therapy didn't work. I know you don't want to admit there's something wrong, but Jesus fucking Christ, you need help. Will shrugged. I'd rather not drag anyone else down with me. You wait there, June said and ducked back inside. Will shrugged again as she rummaged around through the back of one of their drawers, behind where she kept the first aid kit. When June stepped out onto the fire escape again, she was holding something wrapped in a dish towel. She held it out wordlessly to Will. He took it from her and slowly unwrapped the towel. Some of the ambient light from inside the apartment glinted off the reflective surface of the object inside, and Will switched his grip. He held up the broken mirror shard and turned it over in his hand. Some of the blood had crusted over on the jagged edge, and it was obvious June had never bothered to clean it. The mirror shard was tarnished, with the sharp bits he had used to open the veins in his wrist had dulled with time. You hung on to this? Yes. She studied his face, trying to see if there was any reaction. Why'd you use the mirror? Part of the process. I knew I'd have to break the mirror to do it, and I had a feeling I'd wind up hurting my hands if I did, and obviously it hurt like a bitch. I figured if I didn't have the nerve to deal with that pain, I wouldn't be able to go through with it, and then I could have backed out and passed off as a panic attack or something. But honestly, after breaking the mirror, I mostly just felt numb, so I went through with it. The rest is history. Plus, he said with a shrug, it was kind of poetic. Why did you keep this? I don't know. It seemed like the right thing to do. Will grunted by way of reply. His muscles tensed, and June moved to grab him before he could hurt himself again. Will shook out of her grasp and hurled the mirror shard at the wall of the neighboring building with a kind of fury June had never seen in him before. The way his face curled into a snarl, the potential for violence lurking in his eyes told her that no matter what Will might claim to the contrary, that hatred was still there. When the piece of glass and silver cracked into a multitude of glittering pieces, Will barked out a short, humorless laugh before seizing the wine bottle from her hand and draining it in 3 swallows. He coughed once and then nodded, his strange aggression seemingly abated. His face shifted back to normal and his eyes cleared. Well, that felt good. Will's tone was remarkably cheery, and that made it all the more chilling. June was silent, standing as far from Will as she could be. He shrugged and leaned against the railing again, eerily calm. June tried to get her breathing under control and pulled her coat close around her. When the silence stretched to a point where it had become acutely uncomfortable, she managed to find her voice. Why? I didn't need it anymore. Will didn't look at her. June traced his gaze and saw him looking down at the collection of fragments in the alley below. I told you if I was going to try again, I wasn't going to do it the same way. Keeping that thing around wasn't doing anyone any good. I honestly can't say why I hung on to it. June fumbled in her pocket for her cigarettes. When she managed to extract her lighter, she held up her hand in front of her mouth as a windbreak. She could tell Will was trying without much success not to look at her while she struggled to get the flame to catch. Finally, after she took a long drag and exhaled a cloud of smoke, she turned back to her friend and tried her best to sound casual. So how would you do it if you were going to do it again? Will gave an almost imperceptible shrug. I thought about that for a while. I think I'd probably jump off a cliff into the ocean. It's a little more poetic than the mirror thing. I've always kind of fancied dying in water. June found she couldn't help but burst into nervous laughter. The sound was strange to her ears, just a little too shrill. Diving off a cliff into the sea? That's how you want to go out? Just like fucking Ophelia? Well, I was thinking a little bit more like Percy Shelley, Will said, but I guess you're right. Just like fucking Ophelia. Thank you. And now May Wilcott's going to close us out.
Hi, I'm May Wilcott, and today I'll be reading from my thesis, which is entitled Moonvines. My thesis advisor was Professor Orsini, and without her I never would have been able to complete this collection. I dedicate my thesis to my 2 grandmothers, both of whom taught me what it is to be a strong woman. So the first poem I'm going to read is called Blood Moon. It's almost October, the grass beneath the chapel wet and cold beneath my feet. People are gathered in pockets, friends laughing and leaning into each other with hunched shoulders, almost lovers brushing hands for a moment before turning back inside themselves to hide. The moon isn't half so big as we heard it would be, but there's something about it, red light in the distance, that holds our attention like an anchor in the sky. So far from this world, yet so close to this life, space seems much wiser than anything here. We're all seeking something wrapped up in this night, the answers to questions we feel but can't name. Something is missing, something's been lost. When we speak to each other, the words pass straight through. These days they say we're only coding in selfish genes. In 20 years, will I remember wishing to pinch the moon between my 2 fingers, hold it steady while life shakes the sky. Okay, the next poem that I'm going to read is called Oh Bod. The moments after sex are empty. I arrange my body close to yours, but it is never close enough. And by the dutiful way your fingers stroke my hair, I know that you will leave me. The light at the window is yellow. Your eyes in the sun are yellow. If I tell you that my mother never loved me and my father loved me the wrong way, will it make you stay? Take me, suck the past like poison from my lips. Isn't that what lovers do? But there is no mystery in me. You can see my childhood in the practiced nature of my hands, gentle but insistent on your back. Is that why you pull away? The next one that I'm going to read is called What I Can't Do. It's evening now. The shades are drawn and the cat in the corner is playing with a pile of bones. Photos of us line the yellow walls, screwed so roughly into plaster that it's begun to crack. 6-year-old me standing by my bike in fresh sneakered eagerness, your hand on my shoulder. Another, you crouching low with a bouquet in your arms, me in a tutu running towards you with a grin so big it looks like my face might break. I shudder now. Ah, there it is, wave of shame and hurt. Your footsteps shake the ceiling from above. I know you are here. I feel you everywhere I go. Your breath on my shoulder, musty and hot. I try to tell the shadows to please just go away, but the footsteps grow louder and the door flings open. You kneel before me and wet your thumb on your tongue, then wipe the soot from my upper lip hard and leave your finger resting there. I shake under you. You whisper, why can't you just love me, baby May? It's a moment before I realize you're crying. And then the next poem that I'm going to read is one that I wrote after a conversation with my grandfather during spring break. It's called In the Garden. So the spring comes again, and with it longer afternoons spent reading on the porch in the company of birds who seem as relieved as you that the bite in the air has gone, if only to hide for a little while. The strawberries have grown sweeter, and you let each one rest full and heavy on your tongue before biting down. Something about this season makes you think of being young, when you believe that promises were made and kept, that glue could fix the broken. It won't be long now, for heat will overwhelm the breeze, and the mosquitoes will reappear. But for now you sit, and you listen to the rhythmic clang of the gate as the wind blows through, to the sign of the willow. And then the last poem that I'm going to read is also the last poem of my thesis. So it's called Daddy. Oh well, you see, what's done is done. Memories are more tangled web than anything else. And your hand is neither kind nor cruel, though in some lights of day it may seem more one than the other. How can I make sense of you, my God grown dim with age? Oh, how I believed in you. How I pressed my hands to your cheeks and held your face close to mine as if it were the world.